Bride kicks poor old beggar woman at her wedding, unaware she knows the dark secret of the bride. Hi, my beautiful family. I speak to you today with a heart full of love, built also with truth. Our channel is built on your strength, your love, and your support. Every story I write is written with tears, with passion, and with prayer for each one of you. But my family, I see the channel going down because many forget to like, many forget to comment. It hurts me because it feels like my hard work is left unseen. I ask you today, not just as a creator, but as your brother who truly loves you, please, whenever you watch, give your love back. A simple like, a simple comment keeps this family alive, keeps our light shining, and gives me the power to bring you more and more beautiful stories. May God bless every woman in this family with honor, with dignity, and with unshakable strength. May every man be blessed with wisdom and respect. May our children rise higher than mountains, and may every home be filled with endless love and peace. Amen. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write in the comment where you're watching from. The bride thought she was untouchable. She thought her secrets were buried forever, hidden beneath diamonds, silk, and a smile rehearsed in every mirror she'd ever passed. But secrets have a way of crawling out when you least expect them. And for Vanessa, the moment of reckoning came on the very day she believed she'd finally won. It was supposed to be perfect. The kind of wedding that lived on Instagram feeds and glossy magazine covers. White roses framed the aisle. A quartet played softly, strings shimmering in the afternoon air. The groom stood tall, handsome, nervous in all the right ways. Guests whispered about how beautiful everything was, though most were just waiting for the open bar. Then she arrived, not in a limousine, not in glittering heels, but in rags. A hunched figure with grey hair tangled by the wind. The old woman stepped into the ceremony like a shadow cutting across sunlight. At first, people thought she was lost, or maybe desperate for food. And honestly, some looked away, embarrassed, uncomfortable. No one wanted her there. No one, except Vanessa, who didn't look away at all. She stared, her face twisted, fury burning hotter than the summer sun. Then, with all her makeup and lace and self-importance, she marched forward, and before anyone could stop her, she shoved the woman to the ground. Gasps. A ripple of disbelief. Even the violinists faltered. Trash, the bride hissed. That was it. One word. Sharp enough to slice through the laughter, the champagne buzz, the illusion of elegance she'd worked so hard to build. But here's the thing. The beggar woman didn't cry, didn't plead. She just looked up at Vanessa, eyes steady, calm, almost knowing. And in that silence, something shifted in the crowd. A few guests stiffened, their brows furrowed. A couple whispered, voices tight with recognition, because this stranger wasn't really a stranger at all. And that's when the story you're about to hear truly begins. A story not just about arrogance or cruelty, but about the one thing money, diamonds, and designer gowns can never bury. The truth. See, Vanessa thought she'd built a fortress out of lies, sealed tight against her past. She thought no one would ever dare drag her secrets into the light. But on the one day she wanted the world to worship her, that fortress cracked, and it started with the woman she tried to kick aside. Buckle in, because this isn't just petty drama. This is a tale where karma didn't just knock it, kicked the door wide open, and sat down at the head table. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't whispered. It was shouted for everyone to hear. Oh, and before we dive headfirst into the chaos, let me say this. If you love stories where justice doesn't just arrive, but arrives late, dressed in black, and ready to dance on lies, make sure you hit subscribe. These scripts take hours to write, edit, and recover from, trust me. Second-hand rage is exhausting. Your support means the world. Now let's begin. Vanessa always knew how to command a room, not because she was kind or gracious or even particularly likable, but because people were taught early on that everything revolved around her. She grew up in a mansion that smelled of polished wood and old money. Her parents, especially her mother, made sure Vanessa was the diamond on display. Designer clothes before she could spell the word fashion, birthday parties that looked more like red carpet premieres. And let's just say if Vanessa wanted something, the world moved. If her sister wanted something, well, that usually depended on whether Vanessa was finished first. From a distance, it was dazzling. Picture-perfect family portraits, glowing report cards, though most of her grades were massaged by tutors who were more terrified of losing the paycheck than teaching her algebra. And when she walked into school, heads turned, not because she was loved, but because being in her orbit meant surviving with fewer bruises. You know the type. The girl everyone pretended to adore, but only because the alternative meant being frozen out, or worse, being humiliated for sport.py the time she hit her 20s. Vanessa had perfected her act. She was beautiful. Yes, but it was the performance behind it that sold the illusion. The laugh that was just a little too polished. The way she'd tilt her head and make you feel like you were the most important person in the room until you walked away and heard her whispering to someone else, tearing you down piece by piece. The truth, she wasn't admired. She was tolerated, and yet, somehow, the world rewarded her anyway. Job offers handed to her before she applied. Invitations to parties where others clawed for months just to get noticed. Even her family seemed hypnotized, offering her praise and attention as if she were royalty. Meanwhile, everyone else was left playing supporting roles. By the time the wedding rolled around, Vanessa's reputation had already hardened into something unshakable. She was the golden bride, the girl who had it all, and made sure you knew she had it all. Guests arrived in crisp suits and flowing gowns, each one careful to bring their best smile. Because with Vanessa, smiles were a form of survival. Whisper anything less flattering, and she'd find out. Oh, and she always found out. But here's where it gets interesting. Behind those polite congratulations and glittering champagne glasses, the whispers still thrived. Some murmured about how she only cared about appearances. Others traded stories of how she'd sabotaged coworkers, manipulated friends, and lied without blinking. One guest leaned over to another, voice low but sharp. She treats everyone like pawns, doesn't she? Even him. The him, of course, being Ryan the groom, blissfully or foolishly standing at the altar waiting for her. Another replied with a forced laugh. Well, she's always been like this. What else is new? The irony was almost poetic. A sea of people dressed in their best, clinking glasses, pretending to adore her, while secretly rooting for the tiniest crack in her perfect mask. But Vanessa, she never noticed. Or maybe she didn't care. She carried herself as if she was untouchable. Every step down that aisle was deliberate, a performance, a declaration. I am above you. I always have been. And that's the thing about arrogance. It blinds you. It makes you believe the world exists for your benefit. That people aren't people at all, they're props. Vanessa was the kind of person who would look at a stranger struggling and see it as an inconvenience, not an opportunity for kindness. The kind of bride who would treat her wedding like a coronation, a stage, a throne, and on that day, she believed her kingdom was secure. She believed everyone in that garden was there to worship her. She didn't know that one unexpected guest would shatter it all. But that part, that comes later. For now, what you need to understand is simple. Vanessa was the golden bride. Yes, but gold, when scratched, reveals what lies beneath. And for Vanessa, that shine had always been just a mask. Oh, let me ask you, do you know someone like that? Someone who acts like royalty even when they don't deserve it? Drop a heart in the comments, because if you do, you'll understand exactly why this story hits the way it does. The wedding wasn't just an event, it was a production. The kind of day designed to be photographed, edited, and blasted across every social feed until it looked less like a marriage and more like a brand launch. White roses cascaded down marble arches, spilling onto the aisle in perfect spirals. The air carried that expensive, sweet perfume of imported flowers, the kind you know were flown in just to wither under the summer sun. A string quartet played at the far end of the garden, their bows slicing rhythmically across violins, filling the silence between conversations with elegance. Even the chairs weren't just chairs, they were carved mahogany with velvet cushions. No detail, however small, escaped Vanessa's grip. And then there was the dress. Layers of satin so heavy it needed 2 attendants just to fluff it into place. Pearls stitched into every seam, each one catching the light like a camera flash. A veil that trailed behind her like a silver river. She wasn't walking into a wedding, she was making an entrance. A statement, a warning. Ryan, the groom, looked the part too. Handsome, polished, his smile carefully measured. But here's the thing, if you looked close, really close, you'd notice the tightness around his mouth, the way his hands twitched, as if the cufflinks were suddenly too tight. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were blinded by the spectacle. But some people noticed. And oh, the guests. They arrived in tuxedos and gowns, carrying the kind of polite smiles people wear when they're more curious than supportive. You could hear it in the whispers carried on the breeze. She really outdid herself, one woman murmured, her jeweled clutch pressed tight against her chest. Another leaned in, lowering her voice. Outdid or overcompensated. There it was, the hairline cracks in the illusion. For all the beauty of the setup, our knees lingered. Vanessa's parents sat near the front, faces frozen in expressions that tried too hard to look proud. Her mother, dressed in gold satin, watched everything with hawk-like precision, as if keeping the image intact was her personal duty. Her father smiled wide, but it was the smile of a man who'd smiled on command for decades. You could tell neither one was relaxed. Ryan's family, though, they were quieter. His mother clutched a handkerchief in her lap, dabbing at her eyes, even though the ceremony hadn't started. His brother leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching Vanessa like he was studying a warning label. You know the look, half curious, half concerned. And here's where it gets interesting. Every time Vanessa turned, her expression softened, at least for Ryan. She'd flash him that practiced, adoring look. The kind that said, see, I'm the perfect bride. Look how lucky you are. But the second she faced the crowd, it shifted. Cold, calculated, like she was surveying subjects in her kingdom. Now, don't get me wrong. There were people there who adored her, or at least convinced themselves they did. Old school friends who still lived in her shadow. Business contacts desperate to stay in her good graces. Even distant relatives who whispered, she's always been destined for greatness. But the tone was never genuine. It was reverent in the way people revere power, not love. And power was exactly what Vanessa was marrying for. Some guests noticed Ryan's hesitation, the way his gaze sometimes drifted past her, toward the horizon, like he was searching for an escape hatch. His best man, a tall guy named Marcus, whispered something that made Ryan chuckle nervously, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes. One woman near the back fanned herself and muttered, "Does anyone actually think this is about love?" Her companion smirked. Love doesn't hire a choreographer for the vows. Ouch. Because yes, that's how meticulously this day had been planned. Even the words they'd exchange were rehearsed, polished. perfected until they no longer sounded like promises, but like lines in a script. Still, Vanessa carried herself as if no one doubted her. Her heels clicked against the stone walkway. Her gown gleamed in the sun, and her smile never faltered. If arrogance were a perfume, she drenched herself in it, and yet the air buzzed with something unspoken. You could feel it in the pauses between violin notes, in the way people exchange glances instead of compliments, in the subtle question lingering behind every champagne toast. Is this real? Ryan shifted again, tugging at his cufflinks. For just a second, his eyes flicked toward the beggar woman at the garden's edge, though no one else seemed to notice her yet. He blinked, shook his head, and looked back at Vanessa, but unease lingered in his posture, in the way his smile cracked when she turned away. The stage was set. The audience assembled, the golden bride ready for her coronation, but perfection has a short shelf life. And on that day, surrounded by roses and whispers, the seeds of downfall were already planted. So tell me, would you ever attend a wedding even if you couldn't stand the bride or groom? Be honest, because half the guests at Vanessa's wedding were sitting there for one reason only, to watch the show. And trust me, what came next was worth every seat in the house. The music was still playing when it happened, violins drifting through the air, the sun hitting the roses just right, guests leaning forward as if the entire world had narrowed to that one aisle. Everything was perfect, too perfect. And then she appeared. At first, people thought she was just a shadow moving along the edge of the garden. But no, it was a woman, old hunched, her clothes tattered and stained. Her shoes were scuffed down to threads, her hair tangled into knots the color of ash. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if she was carrying the weight of years on her shoulders. Conversations faltered. Fans stopped fluttering. A few gasps slipped through the crowd. She didn't belong in this carefully constructed fantasy, and her very presence broke the illusion like glass underfoot. Some guests looked away, embarrassed, as if ignoring her might make her vanish. Others whispered sharply, their words a mix of pity and disdain. Who let her in? She shouldn't be here. Poor thing. She looks hungry. But Vanessa didn't just notice her. She fixated on her, eyes narrowing, lips curling into something sharp and dangerous. The bride stepped forward, her veil trembling with her stride. The music faltered, one violinist's bow screeching against the strings before falling silent. What are you doing here? Vanessa snapped, her voice slicing through the air. No warmth, no compassion, just venom. The old woman didn't answer. She simply stood there, looking up at Vanessa with eyes that didn't waver, calm, steady, almost knowing, and that calmness only enraged her more. You don't belong here, Vanessa hissed. Her hand shot out, shoving the frail woman backward. She stumbled, falling hard against the stone path. The thud echoed, louder than it should have, silencing everything else. Gasps erupted across the garden. One guest clapped a hand over her mouth. Another muttered, "My God." Ryan froze. His jaw slackened, eyes darting between his pride and the woman sprawled on the ground. His hands twitched like he wanted to move, to help. But something kept him rooted. Fear. Shock? Maybe both. And then Vanessa delivered the blow that no one could forget. She spat the word like it was poison. Trash. One word, cruel enough to slice through every violin note, every rose petal, every illusion of perfection. The old woman didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't even try to stand right away. Instead, she lifted her chin and stared at Vanessa with a look that sent a shiver through the crowd. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shame. It was recognition. Like she'd seen this all before, and in that silence, something shifted. The whispers began again. But this time they weren't about pity. They weren't about embarrassment. They were sharper, hesitant, uneasy. I've seen her before. One voice murmured, "Wait, that face, doesn't she look familiar?" Another guest leaned closer, brows knitting. "Oh God, I think I know who she is." Brian's expression changed then. Not relief, not comprehension, but dread. As if, in that single moment, he understood exactly who the old woman was and why her eyes never left Vanessa's. The bride, though, still hadn't noticed. She stood tall, chin high, breathing hard like she'd just conquered an enemy. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that this was the moment everything began to unravel, because this woman wasn't a stranger. She wasn't some nameless beggar wandering into the wrong party. She was something far, far worse for Vanessa. And then people began to recognize her face. So tell me, what would you have done if you saw someone treated like this at a wedding? Would you have stepped in? Or would you have sat frozen, waiting for the truth to come crashing down on its own? At first, no one dared to move. The beggar woman sat on the stone path, dust clinging to her ragged skirt, a thin trickle of blood running down her wrist where it scraped against the gravel. But her eyes, those eyes, never left Vanessa. And then someone whispered her name. Not beggar, not stranger. A name. The sound traveled like a ripple across water. Low at first, then louder as recognition spread. Some gasped, others exchanged horrified glances. And Ryan looked like his entire world had tilted. Vanessa's smile forced. Brittle faltered. She turned sharply. "Who is she?" she demanded, her voice edged with panic. No one answered. Not at first, until a man near the back, older, with a shaking voice, finally spoke. That's Eleanor. Eleanor Hayes." The name landed like a strike of thunder. A hush fell over the garden. Because Eleanor Hayes wasn't just anybody. She wasn't some wandering soul begging for scraps. Years ago, she'd been known in this very town. Known, respected, and feared by some. Vanessa's face drained of color. "That's impossible," she hissed. "She's dead." But the woman Eleanor rose slowly to her feet, every movement deliberate, every second stretched tight with tension. She brushed the dust from her skirt, straightened her back, and spoke for the first time. "Dead." Her voice was cracked, but steady. "No, Vanessa, I've been very much alive, living with the consequences of your choices." The crowd shifted uneasily. Murmurs swelled. Vanessa's hand trembled as she clutched her bouquet like a weapon. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. But the tremor in her tone betrayed her, and Eleanor smiled. Not warmly, not kindly. It was the smile of someone who had waited far too long for this moment. "Oh, you remember," she said. "You remember the summer your father's company collapsed. The summer when every creditor came knocking, and your family was about to lose everything." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Stop." Eleanor ignored her. Her gaze never wavered, piercing through the silk, the diamonds, the veil. "You remember how desperate your father was. And you remember what you did. The lies. The deals you cut behind closed doors. The people you ruined, people like me. Do you really think time erases that?" Gasps erupted. A bridesmaid pressed her hand against her mouth. One of the groomsmen muttered under his breath, "My God." Brian turned to his bride, his eyes darkening with dawning comprehension. "Vanessa," he whispered. "What is she talking about?" Vanessa laughed then, too loudly, too sharply. A brittle sound that broke before it left her lips. "She's insane. She's nothing. She doesn't know anything." But Eleanor stepped closer, her frail frame somehow commanding the entire garden. "Oh, I know enough. I know about the bribes you paid to bury your father's crimes. I know about the documents you forged, the names you signed. And I know the truth about that donation You made the one that left dozens of families destitute while you and your father bought your way back into high society. The whispers turned into a roar. Faces hardened. Some guests who had once been smiling now recoiled, their admiration curdling into disgust. Ryan's face twisted, horror etched into every line. "Vanessa," he said again, but this time his voice broke. "Is it true?" For a second, just a second, she faltered. Her perfect mask cracked. But then, with a flick of her chin, she snapped back into character. "She's lying," Vanessa barked. "She's just jealous. A bitter old woman who can't stand to see me happy." But Eleanor didn't flinch. She reached into the folds of her one shawl and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Her fingers shook, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper than rage justice. "I kept everything," she said softly. "The letters, the receipts, the signatures, proof of what you did." Vanessa's breath caught. The crowd fell silent again. A silence so heavy, it felt like the roses themselves had stopped breathing. Eleanor's voice dropped lower, but it carried, strong enough for all to hear. "You thought you buried me. You thought your lies would rot with me in the ground. But here I am, Vanessa, standing in the ruins you left behind. And I won't be silent anymore." For the first time all day, Vanessa looked small. Not radiant, not golden, just small. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet until petals snapped, falling like broken crowns to the ground. The groom turned away, pressing a hand over his mouth. The guests shifted, their faces filled with something between shock and betrayal. And Vanessa, she looked around desperately, like a queen whose court had just abandoned her. But there was no saving face. Not anymore, because the secret wasn't just whispered now. It was spoken, named, unearthed, and once unearthed. A secret like that doesn't go back into the ground. So, let me ask you, do you think secrets always find a way of coming out, no matter how long it takes? Or do you believe some truths really can stay buried forever? The garden had once felt enchanted, like a fairy tale brought to life. But after Eleanor's words, the spell was broken. The air grew heavy, brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. And Vanessa, she was at the center of it, desperately trying to glue the pieces back together before anyone saw the cracks. But it was too late. Everyone had seen. Guests leaned toward one another, voices low but urgent. Some exchanged horrified looks. Others raised their brows in smug satisfaction because, let's be honest, not everyone rooted for Vanessa to begin with. "Did you hear that?" A woman near the aisle whispered. "I always said she was hiding something." Another muttered back, even the vendors, the florists, adjusting bouquets. The servers hovering near the champagne trays exchanged uneasy glances. Their eyes flicked toward the bride, no longer with awe, but with suspicion. And then came the family. Her mother's face, tight and pale. Her father's jaw clenched so hard you could see the muscles twitch. A cousin, bowled after too many glasses of wine, blurted, "Vanessa, is she telling the truth?" The words cut through the murmurs. All eyes turned back to her. Vanessa laughed. "Too high-pitched, too brittle. Of course not. She's a bitter old woman looking for attention. Do you think I'd ever be mixed up in something like that?" But her voice shook. Her hands shook too, though she tried to hide it by clutching her bouquet so tightly petals fell like wounded soldiers onto the stone path. And Ryan, poor Ryan, his tuxedo was immaculate, but his face betrayed everything. The confusion, the betrayal, the fear that maybe, just maybe, the woman he loved wasn't who she claimed to be. He tried to steady his voice. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "just tell me, is there any truth to what she's saying?" Vanessa turned on him, eyes blazing. "You're seriously asking me that? On our wedding day?" She forced a smile for the crowd. "See, This is exactly what she wanted to ruin the happiest day of my life. But her performance wasn't convincing anymore. Not with mascara streaking beneath her eyes. Not with the raw edge of panic creeping into every word. The guests weren't buying it. They leaned back, arms folded, skeptical now. Some even smirked. Because people love a show, but they live for a scandal. And Vanessa's fairy tale wedding was quickly becoming the kind of scandal that would be whispered about for years. Her uncle cleared his throat. "Vanessa, I think we deserve an answer," her mother hissed. "Not now," trying to keep the family image intact. But the damage was already done, and Eleanor, she didn't need to say another word. She stood calmly to the side, watching, her silence louder than any accusation. Her presence alone was enough to unravel everything. Vanessa spun back toward the guests, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. She's nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. You're all letting some crazy old woman ruin what should have been the most beautiful day of our lives." But that cruelty, the venom in her tone, only confirmed what people already suspected. The golden bride, the perfect daughter, the woman everyone was supposed to envy. She was ugly underneath. A bridesmaid whispered to another, "I can't believe she kicked her." Right in front of everyone, the second one nodded grim. She showed her true colors, and that was it. The mask had slipped. No amount of diamonds or silk could fix what was broken now. Ryan stepped back, shaking his head slowly. He didn't say anything he didn't need to. His silence screamed louder than Vanessa's frantic protests. The music had stopped long ago, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Heavy, condemning. Even the roses lining the aisle seemed to wilt, their petals drooping as if ashamed to be part of this disaster. Vanessa's voice cracked. "Brian, please don't listen to her. Don't listen to them. You love me. You know me." But he didn't answer. The whispers grew into steady murmurs again. A tide Vanessa couldn't stop, no matter how frantically she waved her arms, no matter how shrill her voice became. And there it was, the fairy tale slipping through her fingers. No one saw her as a glowing bride anymore. They saw her for what she was, a desperate woman clawing to protect her illusion, even as it crumbled all around her. Oh, what do you think? Can Vanessa still talk her way out of this? Or has her mask already shattered beyond repair? Vote now in the poll on screen. I'm curious to see if you think there's any redemption left in her story. For the longest time, the old woman had stood silent, watching, absorbing every flinch, every denial, every desperate attempt Vanessa made to claw back control. And then, when the noise reached its peak, when whispers turned into questions, and questions into accusations, she finally spoke. Her voice was low, steady, not the trembling tone of someone broken, but the calm of someone who knew she no longer had to beg. "I knew this day would come," she said, eyes fixed on Vanessa. The crowd stilled. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Vanessa's laugh cracked in the silence. "She's delusional. Don't listen to her." But the woman didn't flinch. She raised her chin. Vanessa rose. "I knew you when your shoes had holes in them, when you clawed your way out of the mess you made, stepping on everyone else to look like the princess you always pretended to be." A ripple tore through the guests. Heads turned, brows furrowed, Ryan's mouth parted, his gaze snapping to his bride. "What is she talking about?" The old woman took a step closer, her frail hands trembling, though her voice never did. She wasn't always this polished, this perfect. She left people behind, lied, stole, buried her past like a corpse, and prayed no one would dig it up. Vanessa's face drained of color. She shook her head violently. "Stop it. None of this is true." But everyone could see the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her shoulders curled inward as if trying to make herself smaller. The woman's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Do you remember me, Vanessa? Because I remember you. I remember the night you made a choice that destroyed everything. Castles rippled again, sharper this time. No one dared move, and just when it seemed like she might reveal everything, every sordid detail, she stopped. She let the silence hang, heavier than any confession. Her eyes, unblinking, locked on Vanessa's trembling figure. That silence spoke louder than 1,000 accusations. It said, I know. And now, so does everyone else. Vanessa's voice broke, shrill with fury. You're nothing. You're a liar. Get out of here before I. But her words fell flat. No one believed her anymore. Not when the woman's calm was the perfect mirror against Vanessa's unraveling. The crowd shifted uneasily, their faith in the bride dissolving right before their eyes. Ryan stepped back again, his face pale, his jaw set, and that's when the old woman delivered the final blow, not with details, not with proof, but with a single line. Sometimes the past doesn't knock on your door, it shows up at your wedding. The hush that followed was suffocating. Every guest, every vendor, every family member stared at Vanessa, waiting for her to explain, to confess, to deny. But nothing she said now could erase the tremor in her hands or the truth etched in her silence. Her fairy tale was cracked wide open, and everyone could see the rot inside. When the old woman's words finally settled into silence, the wedding no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom, Vanessa standing at the center, every guest her jury. And just like that, the perfect bride was stripped bare. Ryan was the first to move. He didn't yell, didn't explode. He just stepped away, his eyes fixed on Vanessa with a hollow kind of hurt. That hurt was worse than rage. Rage meant he cared. Silence meant something inside him had broken. Vanessa reached out, her voice cracking. Ryan, please, don't let her ruin this for us. You know me, but did he? The doubt in his eyes said otherwise. Behind them, whispers spread like wildfire. Cousins, co-workers, even old family friends, everyone had something to say now that the illusion was gone. One guest muttered, I always knew she was cruel. Another leaned in close to her husband, smirking. Well, Karma picked one hell of a day. The music never started again. The champagne lost its sparkle. The fairy tale had soured, and no one wanted another sip. And just as suddenly as she had appeared, the old woman was gone. No dramatic exit, no final bow. One moment she was standing among them, steady as stone, and the next she'd melted into the crowd. She left nothing behind but questions, and the crushing weight of truth. Vanessa was left holding the shards of her image, bleeding from the edges of the life she'd built. She tried to laugh it off, to brush away the stares. She's lying. You all believe a beggar over me. But no one answered, not even her parents, who stood stiff and pale, embarrassed beyond words. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't the center of admiration. She was the center of shame. Ryan's voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it sliced deeper than anything Eleanor had said. Vanessa, I don't even recognize you anymore. The words landed like a death sentence. She reached for him again, but he turned away. And that was at the final fracture in the glass castle she had spent years building. Over the next days, gossip spread faster than confetti in the wind. Guests couldn't stop talking. Stories twisted, details exaggerated, but the core truth remained. Vanessa Rose wasn't the flawless bride she pretended to be. She was cruel. She was hiding something. And she'd been exposed on the biggest stage of her life. Business partners pulled back. Family dinners turned icy. Even friends stopped picking up her calls. It wasn't the scandal itself that destroyed her. It was the way she treated the woman. The shove, the word trash, that image burned brighter than any rumor. Because here's the truth. Wealth fades. Beauty fades. But the way you treat people, that lingers forever. Vanessa learned that lesson too late. She wanted to live like royalty, but royalty earns respect. She had demanded it, and in the end, her arrogance cost her everything. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Respect costs nothing, but arrogance can cost you the very life you thought was untouchable. And just like that, karma showed up not in whispers or warnings, but at the altar itself. The very stage Vanessa thought would crown her queen became the place she was unmasked. No court trial, no dramatic sentencing, just truth delivered in front of everyone she wanted to impress. That's the thing about justice. It rarely arrives when you're ready. It doesn't knock politely or ask if the timing works. Sometimes it shows up in lace and flowers, with a beggar's voice carrying more weight than vows. Vanessa thought she had built a fairy tale. What she really built was glass, beautiful, glittering, but fragile. And the moment she chose cruelty over compassion, the cracks began. By the time the truth surfaced, there was nothing left to hold together. It's tempting to ask, could she recover? Could she spin it back in her favor? Maybe. But one thing is certain, respect costs nothing, and arrogance, well, arrogance will always collect its debt, sir. If you found this story as satisfying as I did, go ahead and hit that like button. Drop a comment, tell me, do you think Vanessa deserved an ending like this, or was it too soft? And of course, don't forget to subscribe. It takes hours to write these scripts, bring them to life, and make sure justice is always served cold, because here, one truth always holds. Masks eventually fall, and when they do, the world is watching.